Hey guys, welcome to the Solution Architecture channel, and this is part 2 of the Microservices series, and this is the hands-on development view of it. If you want to see an explanation on what is microservices, what is Docker, what is WebAPI, and what is the process that we will follow, then you have to go back to part 1. But if you just want to jump into the code and see how I've done the code, then you're welcome just to continue with this video. So I will show you in this video how I create the code in Visual Studio Code from scratch, and eventually how we deploy it onto a Docker, onto Linux Ubuntu 18.04. So let's jump into the code. So the first thing we want to do is we want to go to terminal. There's nothing open on Visual Studio Code. You just go to new terminal and new. I've already done that, and I'm in my projects folder. So I'm going to create a directory called my API1, okay, and cd to my API1, and then I'm going to create my application. Okay, so the first thing we want to do is .NET new web API. Now, if you haven't done a web application before, or web API application, I would suggest you first go to other videos where I start off with Visual Studio Code and show you the basics of programming within Visual Studio Code. A web API, as explained in my previous video, is basically an interface of getting to call certain data or access certain databases or access certain rules, or whatever you want to put into your web API, and that is explained in my part 1 of this series. This will now generate all the code necessary for the web API, a very standard out-of-the-box code that supports a typical RESTful web API service. Okay, so the code has been generated, and the next steps, what we need to do, we can go to your Explorer, and we can open the folder here. And all the code on the left-hand side is automatically generated by that .NET new command. And what you'll find in the code is your startup, as usual. You'll find your program, you'll find your projects file, a few references there. You'll find your app settings, JSON file, and you have a controller called values. This is out of the box for Web API, so you can actually just test to make sure that it works. And we'll do that just now. But this is what you get when you create a out of the box, just a clean Web API application in .NET code. Okay, so just ignore that for now. What we want to do is we just simply want to run this. And press F5, and then you select .NET Core. Okay, and that will generate a launch file for you, launch.json file. And now I need to create just press F5 again, and that will build it, it will restore it, and will bring up your web API application. So this is now running it. I'm just going to bring it in view. You see there's actually nothing going on right here, right now, and also we haven't configured SSL. We haven't got a certificate installed on this application, and what you normally do, just to test it, values. That's what comes out of the box of that controller, and you see it works. It gives you values 1 and values 2, and that's just to test if the web API everything works as expected. Going back to the code. Okay, so before we do anything, there's a few configuration settings that we need to set for this to work. And also, what we are planning to do, remember, we're going to add a model. We're going to create a controller for a Web API controller, and we can even create a SQLite database that runs with the application. So the first thing we do is we go into the projects file, and I'm just going to copy and paste what I have, and you'll find the code as well checked into GitHub. So this is just the entity core framework core we need. We also need for code generation, for example, if we want to do any code generation from command line, we also need to add this as well. And now what I want to do is when I go back to terminal, and within my terminal, I'm going to add some packages. The first one we want to add is .NET add package, and the package is entity framework core.SQLite. Okay, you'll see on the top there as well in the project file that it added those package references in there. The next one is the design. So the package is entity core framework.design. That code there, that's installed. And now the code generation design as well. So we have the code generation.tools in there. And this one is Visual Studio.web.codegeneration.design. And to ensure that everything is installed correctly, and you need to always remember to run .NET restore. Okay, that seems fine. Let's just make sure that all the packages are included. Now, okay, we've got our project set up. The next step is to make sure that we add our a database connection. So we need to make sure that we add some sort of connection that we are going to use to generate our database. The first thing that you can do is you can go to app-settings.json, and we've got no database connection in there. So I'm going to add code there that I've previously done, and my database is going to be called products.db data source. This is all you need because SQLite is a local database that runs locally, and it's not a database like MySQL where you have to have a different engine running. It can run within the .NET framework. So you need that. I call it products connection, and it's part of my connection strings. So that's the first thing that you add here. The next thing is you need to go to startup. And within startup your services here, you add the following code. So, okay, this is going to give an error right now because we haven't created the context class yet. So we're going to create the context class, but let's just add this here, and then we're going to create the context class. So this is going to use SQLite. Always click here to see, okay, there's using that needs to be added on top here. This is still going to give an error. So let's go and create the DB context. Okay, so I'm just going to double click on this, copy this, and then go into my main drive. Just going to create another folder called data, not in there, sorry, called data. And then I'm going to create a file in here. Let's click on the right one, and I call that my app db context.cs file. And inside here, I'm not going to type everything in, and the code will be available on GitHub if you want to use that as a base. So that is one there, and we haven't created the models yet. We need to go create the product model. So for now, I'm just going to leave that open. I had a previous one where I tested, so that will be API 1. And let's go create our model. Okay, so the first thing we want to do is also create, because we use model view controller as our, well, not views in this case on WebAPI, but we use controllers and models. So I'm going to add a new folder here called models, and then I'm going to create a new class called product.cs. Okay, so I'm going to just, all I'm going to do is some copy and paste from a save file into this, and we have our model here. Just very quickly, it's got a key ID, products auto-generated key. You've got your product code, product type, description, and quantity. I'm not going to go into make it too complex. So that's what you need to have there. So no red arrows there. Let's go see what's happening on that side. What we need to add here is a using, obviously for that models. You'll see there's a light bulb. Click there, and all errors are gone. So what we can do, just to make 100% sure that everything works, go to your terminal, say .NET build. Okay, build succeeded, and the next step will be now to create our database. Okay, and to create our database, if you haven't watched some of my previous videos, is where I actually show you why we're using the commands we use to create a database. So we start with a model. You can start with a database and then reverse engineer it back to your models, but I like to start with the code and say, okay, products, this is how my table is going to look like, and then reverse engineer that back into creating the physical database that where all the data is going to be stored. So the first thing you do, go to terminal, and you type in .NET EF migrations, add initial create. So when you do this, this will then generate you'll see an extra code in here that sets up the database for you. So this is the first thing you do. Okay, now just to note on your project page, you've got a new folder called migrations and initial create. That initial create, you can call it whatever you want. You can call it release 1, release 2, whatever you want. Now what you need to do, just to make sure, because now a database hasn't created. So you can look in here, there's no DB file. A SQLite file is called a DB file. To generate that database, .NET EF database update. And now on your left hand side you'll see a products.db. You can't view it like this. There is ways to view it. In my previous video I show you how to add SQL as well. You'll see I've got the SQL tools already in there, and you can from here open your database or view your database. On the bottom there you'll see SQLite Explorer. There's your database, there's our table. This is just for EF migrations, don't worry about that, but this is where the structure of your table. And if we right click in here, say show table, there's nothing inside the table at the moment. So that is the first thing. The next step will be to create the WebAPI controller for this product, so we can make a CRUD, so a put, a get, and a delete and an update, so we can make sure that when somebody calls your API, that you can add or delete or whatever you want to do on this specific table. Okay, so what we want to do now is create a controller. We've only got values controller in there. Just want to make sure that we've got everything correct here. We've got our products file. Just want to get rid of that. Products is, this is where the namespace of products is. Make sure we've got everything correct there. Now inside your terminal, I'm going to explain exactly what this means. You type in the following code: ASP.NET code generator. We're going to create a controller. The name of controller is product controller. It's an API. It's probably better to call it products controller. It's an API. It works asynchronously. The model we want to use is myapi.models.product, and the context database context is called myappdb context, and the namespace of the controllers is myapi.controllers, and the output is controllers. Okay, so now what you can see is go to your controllers, and you'll see products controller has been created. And what it does out of the box for you, it creates a get products. That's just a HTTP get. So you've got a get, and you've got a put, which means you can input into there. You need to pass through the product object. You've got your post, which happens after the put, and you've got your delete as well. So that is your controller, and now we'll just test it locally before we actually deploy this to Linux in a container. Okay, so what we want to do first is we want to run our application. So press F5. That will build it again and run the application. So it will pop up a, again like last time, it will pop up a empty browser here because we haven't got SSL again. Okay, if you type in that, nothing really will happen because there's nothing to test. It will only pass you blanks back because there's nothing in our database. So part of the prerequisites is to have Postman. You can use SOAP UI as well, but I like Postman, and this is Postman. So you can download Postman, install part of the prerequisites. And what we want to do here, I just want to go back to that website, just copy this over. And you open a new request, and this is the new request. You'll see on the left hand side you've got the different types of things you can pass through to a RESTful API. You've got get, post, put, all of those things in there. We just want to do, let's just do a simple, this is on 5000, just a simple get, and this will pass back absolutely nothing, it's 0. Okay, so what we want to do is to add data to our database through the web API. We want to create a new request. We will call it post, and HTTP, I think I've got it down here. And we want to pass our parameters through. Say, okay, what's the parameters going to look like? You go here. There's different ways of passing parameters, and don't judge me on this. I'm just going to pass it through in the body. It's going to be the easiest, quickest. The header is probably a better way of doing it, depending on the number of parameters you want to pass through. But this is an object I'm going to pass, a JSON object, and it needs to look like this. So you've got your product code, some any product code. You've got your product type, product description, quantity, post. And you'll see in the bottom here it comes back. I like to see the pretty one. You can see the raw data as well. And you can see a preview of it. The pretty one gives you a JSON format. The ID of this is 1, and your product code is everything is saved in the database. Now, let's just test it and see. Let's go back to our get and say send, and that will bring back that one record. Now I'm going to just send another record just for a test. Let's call it something else. Code 6666. Yep, the devil. Okay, and I'm going to post this. comes back with a product ID 2, and go back to my get, send, and now it will return multiple records from that. And that was like so very simple. This is a simple web API. Our next step will be to go into Linux a little bit more into the detail on how to create, how to install Docker, how to install .NET Core, and how to actually deploy this web API so we can call it on the Linux Ubuntu operating system. Okay, so go back to your project in Visual Studio Code, and what we need to be able to deploy anything to Docker is you will need a Dockerfile. I'm not going to go into detail now, like Docker Compose. There's other things that you can use as well, like the Docker Hub if you want to create your own Docker image and you want to store it in Docker Hub, so you can reuse it, or we can have someone else reuse it as well. But I'm not going to do that. I'm just going to create a simple Dockerfile that deployed this application into my Linux environment. First thing you want to do is you want to create the Dockerfile. Right click, say new file called Dockerfile. Okay. And then I'm just going to copy and paste what I have and then explain how this works. And change obviously as we go along. First of all, we're going to create a build environment, and we're going to pull the SDK, because remember, if you deploy anything into Linux or wherever, what environment, you need to have the SDK for .NET Core, and this is what we're going to do first. Then we establish a working directory. We call our working directory app. You can call it anything you want, but I call it app. And then we have everything in called CS project. All the project files need to be copied into the working folder. Then we do the .NET restore. And then we copy this dot space dot, copies everything else into there, into that working directory. This is important. This, if you want to get your SQLite installed and working, you have to run this database update so it can actually create that .db file for you within your Docker. Then you publish. So this will publish out into the working folder. And then what you need to do is create a runtime environment for .NET Core ASP.NET 2.2. That's what I'm using right now. And then just to make sure, I copy the DB file from the app folder into the working folder, and then also everything else that needs to go to out for the out publish folder. So that's going inside there. And then my entry point. Now this needs to change because my application is called my API 1. So then my entry point will be .NET. It will run .NET, and it will then run the application called myapi1.dll. And this is very important that you have this. Okay, so I assume you know how to install a Linux VM, or you have a Linux PC that you can access. I use Ubuntu 18.04 for this demo. So you go to terminal, and the first thing you always do, just run update. And I'm just going to paste in here. I'm going to install the following packages here. The transport HTTPS, CA certificates, curl, software properties common, and that's what you need for Docker. Okay, so I'm just going to clear this so you have some space on top there. And this is just to make sure that we can use SSL, and this is a package that we need for Docker as well. So it is okay. And just to ensure that that app key is working, Docker release is working. And this is the last before we install it, so just to get the package, a stable one. There is also docker.io. Don't install that. We want to install Docker CE. That's the community edition. Okay, so now we're done installing that. And last step. Okay, first run our update. And then we install Docker. And mine is already installed. So it will run through your, for maybe a little longer than this. If there's a question for yes, just answer yes and go through to the next step until it's finished installing. Before we go into the next step is just to make sure Docker is installed. Just say Docker version, and that will give you the version that's installed. If it's not installed correctly, it will tell you, give you an error there. Okay, so what I'm going to do back on Linux, before we copy over our source code to the Linux box, there's other ways of doing it. You can use deployment tools like Ansible or anything like that out there to deploy. I'm going to do a manual copy using FileZilla, but before I do that, I just want to create a folder called dev, and inside dev, then now we can copy our file using I'm using FileZilla. I'm already logged into that server, so I just want to re-log in. I need to use the correct. Okay, admin is dev, and this is my API code. I'm just going to drag and drop it over there. Make sure everything is inside there. Okay, back to Linux. And there's my folder called my API1, and all my files has been copied over to the Linux box. Okay, so what we want to do now is we want to create a Docker image for our application. And this will now do everything that's inside that Docker file. It will actually go and create and install everything that's needed within the Docker container itself. I'm just going to pause this video until it's done. Okay, one little thing that I've actually, I had an error, but I fixed it. What you do not want to copy over when you do the copy from Windows to Linux, do not copy the bin and the object folders over. That will cause an error. So what I've done is just delete it onto Linux, the box, and ran that command again, and it worked perfectly. So now let's test to see if our Docker image has been created. Sorry, ls. You'll see now it looks like a few. I do have other images on here, but ignore that. The one that you want to see here is my API1. The image is not running yet, and we need to do the second command. Is the following command actually to create to run this image inside Docker. What I'm doing here is I'm setting the ports to 8000. You can use anything. You can use 5000 if you want to. Just using 8000. I'm going to call it web API new and my API1, which is my image name. That one there. And that will run the image for you. So how are we going to test this now? The only other way of doing it is going to our browser, but I want to install I'm going to install Postman like that. I think that's the using Snap. Okay, so Snap will then install a UI type of application onto Ubuntu. So use sudo snap install Postman. This is just like an additional extra you're not paying for. Okay, so Snap is installed. Go there and show the applications. Apologies, it's a bit slow. So open Postman, and Postman is free to use. It's open source, I think. You can just you need to obviously create an account, but it's free. They don't ask any credit cards or any payment methods. It's just it's really a good tool to use. What we want to first do is what's nice. You'll see that if I use Postman somewhere else, I get everything inside. Just the drop downs, everything is in there. If I use it in my Windows box and log in here in Linux, it's available there as well. So the data that we created, I copied that over. So I copied that over, and you can see now that there is 2 tables in our database. And just for complete sake, let's create a post again. Body, keep it raw. It's JSON, and I'm just gonna really be lazy. Copy that over. Not sure if copy will work like this on Linux. I need to remember to take out ID because it's auto-generated. Let's call this 9. Draw 2. And we have 15, for example, and it's a bit slow. I just need to drill down a bit. Okay, so it's not slow, it's just me. And then go back to get. There you are. So our container is working on the server. I'm not going to include how to create a reverse proxy and things like that. That is important. I'm not focusing on really on security, but that is also going to be important for you to consider. You can see now the container is running inside our Linux box as a separate container, and there is ways to access this. And if you have any questions regarding that, please post in the comments below. But thank you very much for listening and viewing this. Just to finalize this, you can see Docker container Alice, and you'll see there's 1 container running at the moment. That's my ID, and it's called WebAPI 1, and it's working on port 8000. Thank you very much. Please subscribe. There's much more coming, much more things that I want to add to this channel. And if you have any suggestions, please put it in the comment, and I can try and put a video together for that. Have a nice day. Cheers.